August 1945, Fort Lincoln, North Dakota. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Private First Class James Jimmy Reynolds placed a plate of sizzling bacon before the Japanese woman. The aroma of smoked pork filled the mess hall, a familiar comfort to the Kansas farm boy who had grown up with such simple pleasures. But the woman before him stared at the plate as if it contained something alien, dangerous. Her thin fingers trembled as she reached forward, then pulled back. When she finally looked up, tears streaked down her hollow cheeks. Jimmy stood frozen, 19 months of war fading momentarily as he witnessed something he could not comprehend. The enemy was crying over bacon. The woman before him was not what he had imagined when he enlisted after Pearl Harbor. She was small, delicate, with intelligent eyes that betrayed exhaustion and fear. This was Dr. Miyuki Tanaka, 28 years old, once a respected field nurse for the Imperial Japanese Forces. Now she sat in an American POW camp staring at a breakfast that would have fed her family for days in a Japan ravaged by war. Jimmy Reynolds had his own story etched in the plains of Kansas, where golden wheat fields stretched to the horizon. Before the war, he had been the pride of Oakley High School, a baseball pitcher whose fastball had scouts talking about prospects with the Kansas City Blues. His father's farm had survived the Depression through stubborn determination and dawn-to-dusk labor. Jimmy had enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor burning with the same righteous anger that swept across America. War had not been kind to Jimmy. The Pacific had claimed friends in jungles whose names he could barely pronounce. Shrapnel at Guadalcanal had left him with a limp that ended his baseball dreams forever. Reassigned to guard duty at Fort Lincoln, he now watched over the enemy he had been taught to hate. Spring 1944, Saipan. Miyuki Tanaka worked frantically in the field hospital as American bombs fell. Blood stained her white uniform as she tried to stabilize a young soldier with a stomach wound. Her father had been a respected army doctor, her mother a school teacher. They had raised her to serve the emperor with unwavering loyalty. Her younger brother Kenji had died 2 years earlier, his body wasted by malnutrition. Her fiancé Takashi had disappeared at sea in 1943, his transport torpedoed by American submarines. The propaganda had prepared Miyuki for monsters. Americans were barbaric devils who tortured prisoners for pleasure. They would rape, mutilate, and kill anyone who surrendered. She had watched in horror as civilians leapt from cliffs rather than fall into American hands. Yet what awaited her would challenge everything she believed. When American forces surrounded the hospital, Miyuki considered the cyanide capsule all medical personnel carried. But her Hippocratic oath prevailed. She surrendered alongside 2 other women, Yumiko Nakamura, a vivacious 21-year-old clerical worker who had once dreamed of becoming an actress, and Akiko Saito, a stern 42-year-old teacher who had lost her husband and 2 sons to the war. Their first encounter with Americans came on the transport ship. The women huddled together on deck awaiting the cruelty they had been promised would come. Instead, a young Marine offered cigarettes. Yumiko, always the bold one, accepted with trembling hands. The soldier simply lit it for her and walked away. No tricks, no demands. Just a simple human gesture that created the first crack in the wall of propaganda. Miyuki watched from a distance, unwilling to accept such kindness. Her medical training had taught her to observe, analyze, compare. She could not help but notice the Americans were tall, healthy, laughing easily. Their uniforms fit properly. Their boots shined. They moved with the confidence of men who had never known true hunger. One evening, Miyuki stood at the railing, watching the sunset paint the ocean crimson. Private Reynolds appeared beside her, smoking quietly. For long minutes, they shared the silence, 2 people from worlds apart. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, almost shy. "You'll be safe there." She didn't understand his words, but his tone carried something unexpected. Not menace, not hatred, perhaps even kindness. She turned away, unsettled by how human he sounded. Inside their cabin, whispered conversations grew bolder. Yumiko confessed the American soldiers reminded her of film actors from smuggled Hollywood movies and she had seen before the war. Akiko scolded her sharply, reminding them of their duty to the emperor. Miyuki remained silent, caught between loyalty to her country and the evidence before her eyes. The transport ship finally approached the California coast. The women pressed to the rails, hearts racing with uncertainty. The shoreline emerged from the morning mist, revealing an America untouched by bombing. Buildings stood tall and whole. Dockyards bustled with activity. Cars moved along coastal roads. The contrast to Japan's shattered cities was painful to witness. As they descended the gangplank, Miyuki whispered to herself, "If they are not monsters, then what are they?" The train journey across America revealed more surprises. Through the windows, they saw vast farmlands, small towns with intact buildings, children playing freely without fear of air raids. Miyuki tried to make sense of it all. How could the enemy be so prosperous while Japan suffered? The contradiction gnawed at her like physical pain. When they arrived at Fort Lincoln, the women expected darkness, cruelty cages. Instead, they found wooden barracks arranged neatly on rolling fields, tall fences, but not menacing ones. Guards walked the perimeter with rifles resting casually on shoulders, their expressions more bored than brutal. The smell of baking bread drifted from kitchen buildings. Miyuki clutched her small satchel, the last remnant of her former life, and stepped across the gravel path, her heart pounding. Captain William Davis, the camp commander, greeted them through an interpreter. A former history teacher before the war, the 55-year-old officer explained camp rules clearly. They would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. They would receive adequate food shelter and medical care. They could receive mail when postal service resumed. In return, they were expected to follow rules and assist with camp duties. Their quarters surprised them most. Clean beds with real mattresses, windows that allowed sunlight, even a small vase with wildflowers on the table. Akiko surveyed the room suspiciously. "This is a trap," she warned. "They want us to trust them before they begin the real torture." The following morning, a bell rang through the camp like a schoolyard chime. The women lined up hesitantly for breakfast, uncertain what to expect. Jimmy Reynolds stood behind the serving counter, dishing out scrambled eggs, bread thick with butter, and sizzling bacon. The smell was intoxicating after months of near starvation. Yumiko stared at her tray, then burst into tears. "In Tokyo," she whispered, "this would feed my family for a week." Akiko refused to touch her food, certain it contained poison. Miyuki took a cautious bite of bacon. The flavor overwhelmed her senses, rich and satisfying beyond anything she had tasted in years. She could not help the tears that followed, ashamed that her first weeping in captivity came not from cruelty, but from kindness. Jimmy watched their reactions with bewilderment. These women responded to ordinary breakfast as if he had served them a feast. What kind of conditions had they endured in Japan? What stories had they been told about Americans? These questions troubled him as he continued serving other prisoners. Later that week, Miyuki was assigned to assist in the camp infirmary. There she met Susan Parker, a 25-year-old American nurse whose husband was fighting in Europe. Susan showed Miyuki around the medical supplies, surprised by the Japanese woman's extensive knowledge. They communicated through fragmented English and medical terminology, creating a tentative professional bond. Susan kept a photo of her husband on the medicine cabinet. One afternoon, she noticed Miyuki staring at it. "My husband," Susan explained, pointing to the image of a smiling soldier. "Fighting in France." Miyuki nodded slowly, experiencing a strange revelation. The enemy had families too. They worried about loved ones. They kept photographs close to their hearts. This simple human connection disturbed her deeply. That night, Miyuki began a secret diary, writing by moonlight on pages torn from a donated notebook. She meticulously recorded contradictions between what she had been taught and what she experienced. "The bacon today tasted better than anything I have eaten in 3 years. Why does the enemy feed us better than our own army did? The nurse has a husband fighting in Europe. She misses him as I miss Takashi. How can I hate someone who shares the same feelings?" As days passed, the women were assigned various duties. Miyuki worked in the infirmary, Yumiko helped in the kitchen, and Akiko reluctantly agreed to teach Japanese to interested officers. These activities provided structure to their days and brought them into regular contact with Americans. Meanwhile, Jimmy Reynolds wrote letters home to his mother in Kansas. "There's a Japanese nurse here," he wrote. "She has the saddest eyes I've ever seen. Sometimes I wonder what she's thinking when she looks at us. Does she hate us? Is she afraid?" The other boys call them the enemy. But it's hard to see them that way when they're just women trying to survive like anyone else. In the kitchen of the Reynolds family farm, Mrs. Reynolds read her son's letter while kneading bread dough. She paused, remembering Jimmy as a boy playing baseball in the Kansas sunshine before war had claimed his innocence. She couldn't imagine the Japanese women he described, but she sensed her son's confusion about this new reality, where enemies had human faces. The prisoners gradually adjusted to camp life, though mistrust lingered. One significant moment came when Jimmy received a package from home. His mother had sent homemade apple preserves and dried apple slices from the family orchard. After some consideration, Jimmy approached Susan with an unusual request. "I'd like to share these with the Japanese women," he explained, showing her the package, "especially the nurse. But I don't think they'd take anything directly from me." Susan considered this thoughtful gesture. "Captain Davis might approve a cultural exchange. We could present American farm life, show them what Kansas is like." With the captain's permission, they organized a small presentation. Jimmy brought photographs of his family, farmed the wheat fields, Sunday baseball games, and family gatherings around the dinner table. He spoke simply about life in Kansas, with Susan translating key points. The women listened with varying reactions. Yumiko leaned forward, eagerly, always curious about American life. Akiko sat rigid, her face a mask of disapproval. Miyuki remained neutral, though her eyes betrayed interest in this glimpse of enemy homeland. When Jimmy offered Miyuki a piece of his mother's apple cake, she hesitated. The simple pastry represented something dangerous, an acknowledgement of shared humanity. Eventually, seeing Yumiko eagerly accept a piece, Miyuki took a small bite. The sweetness transported her instantly to childhood memories, to a time before war when her mother baked similar treats, a time when Japan was peaceful and prosperous. The flavor unlocked emotions she had suppressed for years, and she turned away quickly as tears threatened. When she composed herself and turned back, she witnesses something extraordinary. Akiko, the staunchest traditionalist among them, held a piece of apple cake in trembling fingers. Silent tears streamed down the older woman's face. For the first time, the stern teacher's defenses crumbled. That evening, Akiko finally shared her story. Her husband and 2 sons had starved to death on a Pacific island, waiting for supplies that never arrived. "I cannot forgive myself for eating this cake when my sons died hungry," she confessed. Miyuki responded gently. "Perhaps the best way to honor them is to survive and tell the truth that this war has taken too much from all of us." Meanwhile, Jimmy struggled with his own conflicts. Raised on patriotic fervor and wartime propaganda, he had enlisted expecting a clear moral battle. Instead, he found himself serving food to women who seemed more desperate than dangerous. The injury that had ended his baseball dreams had also given him time to reflect. What exactly were they fighting for, if not to protect the innocent? And weren't these women in their own way also victims of the same war? These thoughts troubled him as he performed his duties, watching Miyuki from a distance, noticing how she maintained her dignity despite circumstances. When she treated minor injuries in the infirmary, her hands moved with practiced precision, revealing years of training and dedication to healing. This contradicted everything he had been told about the brutality of the Japanese. Spring blossomed across North Dakota, bringing thunderstorms that tested the camp infrastructure. During one particularly violent storm, the roof of the storage warehouse began to leak, threatening medical supplies and food reserves. Guards and prisoners worked side by side in the downpour, passing boxes to safety and attempting to secure the damaged roof. In the chaos, Jimmy and Miyuki found themselves holding opposite ends of the same rope, straining to secure a tarpaulin against the howling wind. Rain plastered their hair to their faces as they pulled together. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, not as enemies, but as 2 humans facing the same challenge. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that transcended language and conflict. Captain Davis observed this interaction from the doorway of his office, reminded of his days teaching history. He had lectured about countless wars throughout human civilization, how they began with grand pronouncements, but ended with quiet moments of human connection. Perhaps true peace started not with treaties signed by generals, but with small acts of cooperation between ordinary people. The storm passed, leaving mud puddles across the campgrounds and a shared sense of accomplishment. That evening, the atmosphere in the women's barracks felt different. Barriers had shifted slightly, questions emerging about absolutes they had once believed unquestionable. Then news arrived that changed everything. American radio reported the dropping of new weapons of unprecedented power on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, followed by Japan's surrender. The war was over. The Japanese women received this news with stunned disbelief. Yumiko refused to believe Japan would ever surrender. Akiko entered a state of shock, barely speaking for days. Miyuki, with her scientific mind, tried to comprehend the destructive power described in reports. When she asked Jimmy about these new bombs, his explanation was solemn. "A city destroyed in an instant," he said carefully. "Maybe hundreds of thousands dead." Miyuki whispered, "Then this is the price of war. Both sides have lost. Nobody truly wins." The announcement came soon after prisoners would be repatriated within months. For many, this news brought mixed emotions. They longed for home, yet feared what awaited them in a defeated Japan. Reports suggested widespread destruction, food shortages, and occupation forces. This uncertainty created tension among the women. When Yumiko confessed her intention to stay in America with Frank Torres, the kitchen worker with whom she had developed a relationship despite language barriers, Akiko condemned her harshly. "Traitor," she hissed. "Have you no honor, no loyalty to your homeland?" Miyuki intervened, defending the younger woman's choice. "She has the right to seek happiness. We have lost too much to blind loyalty already." As preparations for repatriation continued, Jimmy approached Miyuki with an unexpected proposal. His family in Kansas had agreed to sponsor her if she wished to remain in America. Not as a romantic arrangement, but as an opportunity for a new beginning. His parents' farm needed help, and the local hospital was short-staffed. "You don't have to decide now," he said through Susan's translation, "but the offer stands." Miyuki found herself torn between worlds. return to a shattered homeland where memories of loss awaited her, or begin anew in the land of former enemies. The decision seemed impossible until news arrived through Red Cross channels. Her family home in Tokyo had been destroyed in firebombing raids. No relatives had survived. She had nothing to return to. Through long nights of soul-searching, Miyuki confronted her deepest question. How could she love a country that had destroyed her homeland? The answer came unexpectedly during her final conversation with Jimmy at the camp fence. I don't know how to love a country that destroyed mine, she admitted. Jimmy's response revealed wisdom beyond his years. Don't love my country. Love the values it represents at its best: freedom, humanity, opportunity. And if someday America fails to live up to those values, help it find its way back. In that moment, Miyuki understood that true patriotism wasn't blind allegiance to a flag or government, but commitment to universal human values. The morning of departure arrived. Surprisingly, Akiko approached Miyuki with a small package containing the name and address of her daughter in California, who had immigrated before the war. I must return to Japan, Akiko declared. It is my duty to help rebuild. But you are young Miyuki. You deserve a different future. In the end, Miyuki chose to stay in America not for Jimmy, but to explore this nation whose values had allowed enemies to be treated with dignity. Yumiko remained with Frank, while Akiko alone returned to Japan, carrying memories of unexpected kindness and lessons learned. Miyuki's journey was just beginning. There would be hardships ahead, prejudice to overcome, a new language and culture to navigate. But she carried with her the most important lesson of all, that humanity could transcend the artificial boundaries of war, and that sometimes healing begins with bacon for breakfast. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly under the autumn sun as Miyuki Tanaka stepped off the Greyhound bus. Fort Lincoln and its fences were now 200 miles behind her, but the memories remained fresh. The small town of Oakley welcomed her with curious stares and whispered conversations. Children pointed, adults quickly looked away when she caught their eyes. She was the first Japanese person most of them had ever seen outside of newsreels depicting the enemy. James Reynolds stood beside her, still wearing his Army uniform, though he'd been officially discharged 3 weeks earlier. The Reynolds family truck, a weathered Ford from before the war, waited in the dusty parking lot. Jimmy's father, Frank, sat behind the wheel, his weathered face expressionless beneath a worn canvas hat. Beside him, Sarah Reynolds twisted her handkerchief nervously, uncertain about welcoming an enemy into her home. Ready? Jimmy asked softly. Miyuki nodded, though in truth she felt anything but ready. Her entire life had been contained in a small canvas bag, a spare dress, her medical credentials that no American hospital would recognize, a photograph of her family from before the war, and the small shell comb Jimmy had given her at Fort Lincoln. The Reynolds farm appeared on the horizon after 20 minutes of silent driving. A 2-story white farmhouse stood proudly amid golden wheat fields with a large red barn and several outbuildings nearby. To Americans, it might have seemed modest. To Miyuki, who had witnessed the utter destruction of Japanese cities, it appeared impossibly prosperous and whole. Sarah Reynolds had prepared the spare bedroom with fresh linens and wildflowers in a mason jar. The simple kindness nearly undid Miyuki's carefully maintained composure. This room was larger than the entire apartment her family had shared in Tokyo. The windows looked out over endless wheat fields rather than bombed-out rubble. Dinner's at 6, Sarah said awkwardly, her Midwestern hospitality battling with years of wartime propaganda. I hope you like chicken and dumplings. That evening, seated around the oak dining table that had been in the Reynolds family for 3 generations, Miyuki experienced another cultural shock. The abundance of food was staggering. A whole chicken, mountains of fluffy dumplings, fresh vegetables from the garden, and homemade bread with creamy butter. In Japan, such a meal would have fed her family for a week. Frank Reynolds bowed his head. Lord, we thank you for this food and for bringing Jimmy home safe to us. Help us remember your teaching that we should love our neighbors and our enemies alike. Bless this meal and the hands that prepared it. Amen. The prayer stirred something in Miyuki. Though she had been raised in the Shinto tradition, she recognized the universal language of gratitude in the startling concept of loving one's enemies. She whispered her own silent thanksgiving in Japanese. Conversation moved awkwardly at first. Sarah asked polite questions about Miyuki's medical training, careful to avoid mentioning the war. Jimmy described Fort Lincoln in sanitized terms, leaving out the tensions and fears. Frank remained largely silent, studying Miyuki with eyes that had seen the Depression dust storms, and now his son, forever changed by war. Will you write to your family in Japan? Sarah asked innocently, unaware of the pain the question would cause. Miyuki set down her fork. My family is gone, she said simply. Our neighborhood was destroyed in the firebombing of Tokyo. Silence fell over the table. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't know. War takes from everyone, Miyuki replied. Your son lost his baseball career. I lost my family. Japan lost its future. America lost its innocence. Frank Reynolds looked up sharply, his eyes meeting Miyuki's directly for the first time. In that moment, a connection formed between them. The farmer who had battled nature to feed his family and the doctor who had fought death to save her patients. Both understood that survival often came at terrible cost. Later that night, Miyuki heard voices from downstairs. Though she couldn't distinguish the words, the tone was unmistakable. Concern, doubt, worry. She was not truly welcome here, not yet. Trust would need to be earned one day at a time. The following Sunday brought another challenged church. The simple white building at the center of town served as the heart of the community. As the Reynolds family approached with Miyuki beside them, conversations halted. Children stared openly. Some people turned away deliberately. Inside, the minister preached about forgiveness and reconciliation. Even as our boys return home from war, we must remember Christ's teaching to love our enemies. This is perhaps his most difficult commandment, but the one most necessary for healing our broken world. Throughout the sermon, Miyuki felt dozens of eyes upon her. Some curious, some hostile, a few compassionate. She recognized one particular gaze, Mrs. Henderson, whose son had died in the Pacific Theater. The woman's eyes burned with quiet grief and anger. After the service, most congregants gave the Reynolds family a wide berth. A few approached cautiously, drawn by curiosity stronger than suspicion. "She's really Japanese," whispered one child loudly before being hushed by embarrassed parents. An elderly man with a World War I veteran's pin approached directly. "My name's Walter Thomas. Fought the Germans in the Great War. Never thought I'd shake hands with a Jap, but the good book says to forgive." He extended a gnarled hand, which Miyuki accepted gratefully. Not all encounters were so gracious. As they reached the truck, a voice called out harshly, "How can you bring one of them here, Frank? After what they did at Pearl Harbor, after what they did to our boys." The speaker was Bill Henderson, husband to the grieving mother Miyuki had noticed inside. He stood rigid with anger, fists clenched at his sides. Frank turned slowly. "Bill, I understand your pain. Truly I do. But this young woman didn't kill your David. War killed him, the same war that nearly took my Jimmy." "She's the enemy," Bill insisted, his voice breaking. "The war is over," Frank replied quietly. "Either we learn to live together or the dying was for nothing." The confrontation ended there, but the tension lingered as they drove home in silence. Miyuki stared out the window at the Kansas landscape, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps there could be no home for her here among people who had lost so much to Japan. That afternoon, Sarah found Miyuki sitting alone on the back porch watching golden sunlight play across the wheat fields. "Don't mind Bill Henderson," she said, settling into the chair beside her. "Grief does terrible things to good people." "He has every right to hate me," Miyuki replied. "Japan brought this war." Sarah considered this. "When Jimmy was born, I caught scarlet fever. Nearly died. Frank drove 40 miles through a blizzard to fetch Dr. Peterson. Do you know what the doctor said after I recovered? He said, 'Don't thank me, thank the Japanese doctor who discovered the treatment.' Medicine doesn't have borders, does it?" Miyuki looked at her in surprise. "Kitasato Shiba Saburo. I don't know his name, but his discovery saved my life, just as you saved lives as a nurse. That matters more than which flag you were born under." That conversation marked the beginning of a subtle shift. Sarah began teaching Miyuki American cooking, while Miyuki shared Japanese techniques for preserving vegetables. When Miyuki mentioned that certain medicinal herbs grew wild on the farm, Sarah listened intently to explanations of their uses. Jimmy observed these developments with quiet satisfaction. He spent his days readjusting to farm life, working alongside his father in the fields. His war injury meant he tired more easily than before, but farm work strengthened his body in ways military rehabilitation had not. In late October, opportunity arose unexpectedly. Doc Wilson, the elderly town physician, fell and broke his hip. With the nearest hospital 30 miles away, and younger doctors still returning from war service, medical care in Oakley became precarious. "They need someone to help at the clinic," Jimmy mentioned it over dinner. "Just basic care until Doc Wilson recovers or they find a replacement." Miyuki hesitated. "They would never accept me." "People get practical when they're hurting," Frank observed. "Medicine might speak louder than prejudice." The next morning, Miyuki accompanied Jimmy to Doc Wilson's small clinic. The waiting room held 3 patients, a young mother with a feverish child, an elderly man with breathing difficulties, and a farm worker with a badly cut hand. The nurse who managed the front desk, Helen Parker, initially refused to even consider Miyuki's offer of assistance. "We don't need help from the enemy," she said coldly. "Ma'am," Jimmy replied evenly, "that child has a fever of at least 102, Mr. Collins can barely breathe, and that hand wound needs stitches before infection sets in." Dr. Tanaka graduated top of her class at Tokyo Imperial University and served 3 years in field hospitals. You need her. Helen looked from the patients to Miyuki, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, practicality won. The examination room is through there. I'll send in the child first. For the next 3 hours, Miyuki worked steadily, drawing on years of training and battlefield experience. The child had strep throat treatable with penicillin. Mr. Collins suffered from pneumonia, requiring immediate intervention. The farm worker received 12 neat stitches and tetanus prophylaxis. As word spread through town, more patients arrived. Miyuki treated each one with quiet competence, explaining diagnoses and treatments clearly. By day's end, she had seen 17 patients, more than Doc Wilson would normally treat in 2 days. When she finally emerged from the examination room, Helen Parker waited with arms crossed. "Where did you learn to stitch wounds like that?" she demanded. "Even Doc Wilson leaves more scarring." "Battlefield medicine requires efficiency," Miyuki answered simply. "When bandages are scarce and patients are many, each stitch must serve its purpose perfectly." Helen's professional assessment battled with her personal prejudice. Finally, she said, "We need someone here 3 days a week until Doc Wilson recovers. $7 per day plus medications. I still don't trust you, but these people need care." Thus began Miyuki's gradual integration into Oakley society. Her presence at the clinic remained controversial. Some patients refused to see the Jap doctor and drove 30 miles to the county hospital instead. Others came reluctantly, their need for medical attention overriding their suspicion. A few, particularly veterans who had seen battlefield medicine firsthand, appreciated her skill regardless of her nationality. One Tuesday morning, Miyuki arrived at the clinic to find Mrs. Henderson waiting, her face tight with conflicting emotions. Her younger daughter, Emily, barely 6, sat beside her with an obviously broken arm. "She fell from the apple tree," Mrs. Henderson explained stiffly. "The county hospital is too far. I have no choice but to bring her to you." Miyuki nodded, understanding all that remained unspoken. "I will take excellent care of her." The examination revealed a clean fracture of the radius, painful but straightforward to treat. As Miyuki gently set the bone and prepared the casting materials, she spoke softly to distract the frightened child. "When I was your age, I fell from a cherry tree in my grandfather's garden. I broke this same bone. My father was a doctor too, and he fixed it just as I'm fixing yours." Emily watched with wide eyes. "Did it hurt?" "Yes, but then it healed stronger than before. Your body is very smart that way." As Miyuki worked, Mrs. Henderson observed every movement with hawkish intensity. When the procedure was complete, Emily proudly displayed her new cast. "Thank you, Dr. Miyuki," she said, using the simplified name Miyuki had adopted for her younger patients. Mrs. Henderson reached for her purse, but Miyuki shook her head. "No charge today." "We don't need charity," Mrs. Henderson said sharply. "It's not charity," Miyuki replied. "It's remembrance, for David." Something shifted in Mrs. Henderson's expression. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but a crack in the wall of hatred. "You know about my son? I know he gave his life in service to his country. As a doctor, I honor those who sacrifice to protect others." Mrs. Henderson studied Miyuki for a long moment. "Emily needs the cast checked next week," she said finally, her voice slightly less cold. Same time, small victories accumulated slowly. The farmer whose hand Miyuki had stitched brought fresh vegetables to the Reynolds farm. A mother whose baby Miyuki had treated for colic stopped Sarah after church to express grudging gratitude. Doc Wilson himself, once able to review patient records from his hospital bed, sent a note acknowledging her exceptional care standards. Yet challenges remained constant. Anonymous phone calls to the clinic threatened Miyuki's safety. A brick through the waiting room window carried a note, "Japs go home." When Miyuki treated the son of a prominent businessman for appendicitis, saving his life with an emergency procedure, the child's father refused to pay, claiming enemy doctors deserved no compensation. Through these trials, Jimmy remained steadfast in his support. Their relationship evolved gradually from awkward coexistence to genuine friendship. They were not romantically involved. Both carried too much war trauma for such simple connections, but they shared a unique understanding born from experiencing both sides of conflict. On Thanksgiving Day, the Reynolds home filled with extended family. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all curious about the Japanese doctor living under Frank and Sarah's roof. Miyuki prepared traditional rice balls alongside Sarah's turkey and stuffing, a symbolic blending of cultures that did not go unnoticed. Jimmy's cousin Robert, recently returned from European service, regarded Miyuki with open skepticism. How do we know she wasn't working for their military intelligence? Japanese Americans on the West Coast were interned for less. "She saved 17 lives last month at the clinic," Jimmy replied evenly. "What matters more, what she did during the war or what she's doing now?" Later, as dishes were being cleared, Miyuki overheard Frank in conversation with his brother. "I didn't fight in this war," Frank said quietly, "but I sent my only son. When he came home talking about this Japanese nurse with sad eyes, I thought he'd lost his mind. But watching her these past months, her dedication to healing her dignity, despite everything, I've come to believe maybe this is why the boys fought. Not just to defeat an enemy, but to create a world where former enemies could become neighbors." Winter descended on Kansas with brutal intensity. Temperatures plummeted, snow blanketed the farm, and Miyuki experienced her first American Christmas. The Reynolds family traditions, hanging stockings, decorating a tree, exchanging modest gifts, were entirely new to her. Sarah presented her with a hand-knitted sweater. Frank gave her a leather-bound medical reference book he'd ordered from Kansas City. Jimmy's gift was the most meaningful, a small wooden frame containing pressed cherry blossoms. "Where did you find these?" Miyuki asked in astonishment, touching the glass reverently. "Before shipping home, we were stationed briefly in occupied Japan. I pressed them between book pages, thinking someday they might remind someone of home." The thoughtfulness of this gesture affected Miyuki deeply. Cherry blossoms, symbol of Japan's beauty and the transience of life preserved by an American soldier amid the chaos of war's end. It represented something profound about humanity's capacity to recognize beauty, even in the land of enemies. That night, Miyuki added a new entry to her diary, which had evolved from documenting contradictions to recording her journey of integration. Christmas 1945. "The Reynolds family has shown me that home is not a place but a feeling of belonging. I wonder if my parents can see me now, living among those we once called enemies. Would they understand that I have found kindness where I expected only hatred? America remains a contradiction, capable of terrible destruction and remarkable compassion in equal measure. Perhaps Japan was the same, though I was too close to see it clearly. Tonight I hung stockings and sang unfamiliar songs about peace on earth. The words felt both foreign and true." January brought influenza to Oakley. The epidemic spread rapidly through the community, overwhelming the small clinic. Miyuki worked 18-hour days moving between the clinic and house calls to isolated farms. Her battlefield experience proved invaluable as she triaged patients and allocated scarce resources. The Henderson home became an unexpected priority when both children and Mrs. Henderson fell ill simultaneously. With no other options, Bill Henderson reluctantly allowed Miyuki into his home. She worked efficiently, establishing an impromptu infirmary in the living room, instructing Bill on proper care techniques. For 3 days, Miyuki returned morning and evening to monitor the family's condition. On the 4th day, as Emily's fever finally broke, Bill Henderson addressed Miyuki directly for the first time. "Why are you helping us? After how I've treated you," Miyuki checked Emily's pulse before answering. "Medicine recognizes no enemies, only patients. My son died fighting your people, and my brother died from hunger because of the war our countries fought. Does that mean your daughter should suffer now?" Bill had no answer for this, but that evening he insisted on driving Miyuki back to the Reynolds farm rather than having her walk through the snow. The gesture wasn't friendship, but it acknowledged her humanity, a crucial first step. As winter gradually yielded to spring, news arrived that would test Miyuki's growing acceptance in the community. Doc Wilson announced his retirement, making the temporary clinic arrangement permanent. The town council needed to decide whether to hire Miyuki officially or recruit a doctor from elsewhere. The council meeting drew the largest attendance in Oakley's recent history. Every chair was filled with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Mayor Thomas Whitaker called for public comments, opening a floodgate of conflicting opinions. Helen Parker spoke first, her initial hostility now tempered by professional respect. "Dr. Tanaka has treated over 200 patients since November. Her records are impeccable, her diagnoses accurate, and her bedside manner appropriate. Whatever my personal feelings, I cannot deny her competence." Bill Henderson rose next, his testimony particularly powerful given his known opposition. "My wife and both my children might have died this winter without Dr. Tanaka's care. I lost my son to Japanese bullets, and I won't pretend that pain has healed. But denying this town a skilled doctor because of where she was born serves no one, least of all the memory of our fallen." Others spoke against the appointment. The businessman whose son Miyuki had saved argued that American jobs should go to Americans. A veteran displayed scars from Japanese captivity, questioning whether someone from a culture capable of such cruelty could be trusted. Mrs. Thomas from the Ladies' Auxiliary worried about the moral example for our children if we embrace the enemy so quickly. Throughout the heated debate, Miyuki sat quietly beside Jimmy, her face composed despite the painful words. She had expected this resistance. What surprised her were the defenders, patients who testified to her skilled, mothers grateful for her gentle treatment of their children. Even Walter Thomas, the WWII veteran, who thundered that healing hands are healing hands, whatever their nationality. When everyone had spoken, Mayor Whitaker addressed Miyuki directly. Dr. Tanaka, would you care to speak on your own behalf? Miyuki rose slowly, facing the community that had become her reluctant home. The room fell silent. I came to America as a prisoner, expecting cruelty, but finding humanity instead. I will always be Japanese. I cannot change the country of my birth, nor would I wish to erase the culture that shaped me. But I am also a doctor trained to preserve life regardless of nationality, religion, or circumstance. If you will allow me to serve this community, I promise to treat each patient with the same care I would give my own family. Judge me not by the actions of my country during war, but by my actions here among you during peace. The council voted 6-3 to appoint Miyuki as Oakley's town doctor with a 6-month probationary period. The decision sparked both celebration and outrage. Several families announced they would seek medical care elsewhere. Others expressed cautious acceptance. A small group led by the businessman whose son Miyuki had saved began a petition campaign to reverse the council's decision. That night, Miyuki confided her concerns to Jimmy as they sat on the porch swing, watching stars emerge above the wheat fields. Perhaps I am being selfish, bringing such division to your town, your family. Jimmy considered this. My father has a saying about planting wheat. You have to break the soil before new growth can happen. Change is never comfortable, Miyuki, but it's necessary. And if the petition succeeds, if I am forced to leave, then we'll face that together. But I believe in the people of this town. Given time, they'll see beyond your birthplace to who you truly are. The following Sunday, Reverend Clark delivered a sermon that many believed was directed at the town's situation, though he mentioned no names. Christ commands us to love our enemies, but what does this mean in practice? It means recognizing the divine spark in every human being, regardless of nationality or past conflicts. It means acknowledging that reconciliation requires courage from both sides. It means understanding that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice and compassion. As spring blossomed across the Kansas prairie, Miyuki established routines that blended her Japanese heritage with her American present. She cultivated a small garden behind the clinic, growing both medicinal herbs and flowers from seeds Sarah had given her. She adapted her medical practice to rural American needs while maintaining techniques she had learned in Tokyo. Letters occasionally arrived from Fort Lincoln connections. Yumiko wrote happily of her marriage to Frank Torres and their small apartment in Denver. Akiko sent a brief formal note from Osaka describing the challenges of rebuilding Japan under occupation, but expressing gratitude for the lessons learned in America. Jimmy received his own correspondence from former Army buddies, many struggling with the transition to civilian life. He shared their stories with Miyuki, creating a bridge between their separate war experiences. Davis writes that nightmares keep him awake, Jimmy confided one evening. He sees the faces of Japanese soldiers he killed on Okinawa. Miyuki nodded in understanding. I still dream of patients I couldn't save. The mind doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy in its wounds. This shared understanding of trauma created a unique bond between them. Neither could fully explain their war experiences to others, but together they could acknowledge both the horror and the occasional moments of unexpected grace that war had brought them. In late April, a defining moment arrived when Bill Henderson appeared at the clinic after hours. His face looked gray, his left arm pressed against his chest. Doc Wilson always said not to ignore chest pain, he said gruffly. Miyuki immediately recognized the signs of a heart attack. Sit down, Mr. Henderson, this is serious. Working swiftly, she administered available treatments, prepared digitalis, and summoned Jimmy to drive them to the county hospital. Throughout the 30-mile journey, she monitored Bill's condition, administering medication and oxygen from her emergency kit. At the hospital, the attending physician credited her prompt action with saving Bill's life. 10 minutes later, and we'd be planning a funeral instead of a recovery. When Bill regained consciousness the following day, he found Miyuki checking his vital signs. He studied her face, seeming to see her clearly for the first time. My boy David was a medic, he said unexpectedly. He joined up to help people, not to kill them. Said he couldn't hold a rifle after seeing what bullets do to a man. He paused, struggling with emotion. He would have appreciated what you did for me. Miyuki understood the magnitude of this statement, the closest Bill Henderson would ever come to acceptance. I wish I could have met him. I think we would have understood each other. 2 weeks later, as May's sunshine warmed the Kansas soil, the petition campaign against Miyuki quietly disbanded. The businessman who had led the effort withdrew his opposition after his son, now studying pre-medicine at Kansas State, declared that Dr. Tanaka's emergency appendectomy had inspired his career choice. The probationary period passed without formal review. Miyuki simply continued her work day by day, earning the community's trust through competence and compassion. Children no longer stared or pointed. They smiled and waved. Adults began greeting her by name on the street. Patients brought small gifts, fresh eggs, homemade preserves, handcrafted items, traditional ways for rural communities to express gratitude to their physician. One June morning, as Miyuki tended her clinic garden, Helen Parker approached with an unusual request. The high school needs someone to speak about medicine as a career at next month's graduation ceremony. Principal Adams suggested you. Miyuki looked up in surprise. Me, wouldn't parents object? Helen shrugged. Some might, but these students have watched you heal their town for 7 months. That speaks louder than any objections. The invitation represented something profound. Not just personal acceptance, but recognition that Miyuki had knowledge worth passing to the next generation. It acknowledged her as part of the community's future, not merely a temporary wartime anomaly. That evening, as fireflies danced above the wheat fields surrounding the Reynolds farm, Miyuki sat with Jimmy on the porch swing. The day's heat lingered in the floorboards beneath their feet, while cicadas created a pulsing rhythm in the darkness. I received a letter from the War Department today, Jimmy said quietly. They're processing citizenship applications for certain foreign nationals who assisted the Allied effort. Your work at Fort Lincoln qualifies you to apply. Miyuki absorbed this news slowly. American citizenship had seemed an impossible dream, yet now it lay potentially within reach. It would mean formally embracing the nation that had once been her enemy, the nation whose bombs had destroyed her homeland and family. Yet America had also become the place where she had found purpose again, where she had rediscovered the healing power of human connection across seemingly unbridgeable divides. The Reynolds family had become her family. Oakley, despite its initial rejection, was becoming her home. What would your parents say? She asked softly, thinking of her own family, and whether they could understand her transformation from prisoner to community doctor. Jimmy considered this carefully. My father would say that a tree is known by its fruit, not by where its seed fell. My mother would say that family isn't just blood, but who you choose to share your life with. As twilight deepened into full darkness, they continued discussing possibilities without reaching conclusions. Some decisions required time, reflection, prayer. But sitting there on the porch of an American farmhouse, surrounded by the night sounds of the Kansas prairie, Miyuki recognized how far she had traveled from that frightened prisoner on a Navy transport ship. The enemy had looked into her eyes and seen a human being. She had looked back and discovered the same. Perhaps that was the most important journey of all. July 1946 arrived with sweltering heat and the sweet promise of ripening wheat. The Kansas prairie stretched golden to the horizon, a stark contrast to the lush mountains of Japan that still appeared in Miyuki's dreams. Nearly a year had passed since her arrival in Oakley, each day a step further from prisoner and closer to belonging. The citizenship application Jimmy had mentioned sat completed on her desk at the clinic, awaiting only her final signature. The decision had not come easily. Accepting American citizenship felt somehow like betraying her homeland, yet remaining stateless meant living perpetually as an outsider. One scorching afternoon, as Miyuki finished treating young Timothy Baker for poison ivy, Helen Parker entered with an unusual announcement. There's a visitor for you, Sue. Says he's come from Washington. The man waiting in the reception area wore a pressed Navy suit despite the heat. He introduced himself as Robert Williams from the State Department, his handshake firm but not aggressive. Dr. Tanaka, I apologize for arriving unannounced. Your situation has attracted attention at higher levels. Miyuki maintained her professional composure despite her racing heart. What situation would that be, Mr. Williams? A Japanese military doctor working in rural Kansas, apparently accepted by the community. It represents something quite remarkable in current relations between our countries. Williams explained that officials overseeing the occupation of Japan were struggling with medical infrastructure. Japanese doctors with military backgrounds faced severe restrictions, leaving many communities without adequate care. American medical personnel were insufficient to fill the gap. We're considering a program to rehabilitate selected Japanese medical professionals. Your experience here demonstrates what might be possible on a larger scale. He placed a file on her desk. Inside were photographs of destroyed hospitals in Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, medical schools reduced to rubble, patients being treated in makeshift facilities. Your country needs future resolution. Dawn arrived with muted golden light filtering through morning mist. The Reynolds family drove Miyuki to the train station in Kansas City, where she would begin her journey to San Francisco, then across the Pacific to occupy Japan. The platform bustled with travelers, soldiers returning from occupation duty, businessmen seeking opportunities in rebuilding economies, missionaries carrying both faith and humanitarian aid. Among them stood Miyuki Tanaka, no longer a prisoner, but a professional on official assignment, her diplomatic documents marking an extraordinary transformation. Final embraces carried the weight of unspoken emotions. Sarah held her tightly, whispering motherly admonitions about eating properly and writing often. Frank shook her hand formally, then surprised her with a quick, awkward hug. "Make us proud," he said simply. Jimmy walked with her to the train door. For a moment, they stood facing each other, all the complexity of their journey visible in their eyes. "The first time I served you breakfast at Fort Lincoln, you cried over bacon," he said softly. "I couldn't understand it then. And now I understand that sometimes the smallest kindnesses reveal our shared humanity." He touched her cheek gently. "Remember that when the work gets difficult." The conductor called final boarding. They embraced briefly, both aware of curious glances from other passengers. In post-war America, such contact between a white man and Japanese woman still raised eyebrows, even disapproval. "Look for my letters," Jimmy said as she boarded. The train pulled away, carrying Miyuki toward a future she could barely imagine. Through the window, she watched the Reynolds family grow smaller until they disappeared around a bend. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling the weed stalk inside, a talisman connecting her to the Kansas prairie that had taught her about second chances. Tokyo in autumn 1946 existed in a state of controlled devastation. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble by American firebombing, while others stood eerily intact. Military vehicles navigated streets once filled with bicycles and handcarts. Occupation forces maintained order, while reconstruction proceeded under strict Allied oversight. Miyuki's official status provided privileges most Japanese citizens lacked: adequate housing and a requisitioned apartment building, sufficient food, and freedom of movement throughout the city. These comforts brought complicated guilt when she witnessed the suffering of ordinary people still struggling with basic survival. Her assignment proved even more challenging than anticipated. The Japanese medical establishment viewed her with suspicion, seeing her American connections as betrayal. Many doctors who had served in the military now faced professional restrictions or outright bans, creating desperate shortages in rural areas. American occupation authorities often lacked cultural understanding to implement effective solutions. Miyuki found herself constantly navigating between worlds, translating not just language, but perspectives and priorities. Her unique experience provided insights neither side fully appreciated without her mediation. One cool October morning, Miyuki visited a makeshift clinic in what had once been Tokyo's University Hospital. The main building remained partially intact, though windows were boarded and electricity functioned sporadically. Patients lined corridors, their ailments ranging from malnutrition to radiation sickness from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Dr. Hideki Yamamoto, once a prestigious professor of internal medicine, now worked with limited supplies and equipment. When Miyuki entered, his initial greeting carried unmistakable coldness. "The American consultant honors us with her presence," he said in Japanese, bowing minimally. "I am Japanese Dr. Yamamoto," she replied in their shared language. "Born in Tokyo, trained at Imperial University just as you were. Yet you wear their uniform, carry their authority," he observed, nodding toward her diplomatic identification. "While those of us who remained face restrictions and shortages." Rather than defending herself, Miyuki asked to see his patients. Together, they moved through crowded wards, discussing cases, sharing observations. She noted his brilliant diagnostic skills despite limited resources. He reluctantly acknowledged her expertise with certain treatments developed during American field medicine. Over a sparse lunch of rice balls and weak tea, professional walls began to lower slightly. "Why did you return?" Yamamoto asked directly. "You had safety comfort in America." Miyuki considered her answer carefully. "Because healing is not limited by national boundaries. The children here deserve care just as much as American children." Yamamoto studied her thoughtfully. "Those words sound American, yet you deliver them with a Japanese heart." He poured more tea. "Perhaps this is what we must all learn, to take what is valuable from each culture without losing our own identity." This conversation marked the beginning of a productive partnership. Dr. Yamamoto introduced Miyuki to other Japanese physicians, helping overcome their initial resistance. Together, they developed training protocols that respected Japanese medical traditions while incorporating beneficial American approaches. Jimmy's letters arrived regularly, bringing Kansas into her Tokyo apartment. He described changing seasons on the farm, community developments, patients asking about her. The Reynolds family added notes: Sarah's domestic updates, Frank's observations about crops and weather. These connections sustained Miyuki through difficult periods of cultural readjustment. In her responses, Miyuki shared both challenges and progress. She described helping establish a nursing school that combined Japanese discipline with American practical training. She wrote about reuniting with distant relatives who had survived the bombing, rebuilding family connections she had thought permanently severed. As winter approached, Miyuki received unexpected correspondence from Yumiko Torres, her fellow former prisoner. Yumiko and her American husband Frank had moved to San Francisco, where they operated a small restaurant serving Japanese-American fusion cuisine. The letter contained remarkable news. Yumiko was pregnant. The doctor says the baby will arrive in spring, Yumiko wrote. Frank hopes for a boy, but I would welcome a daughter with equal joy. This child will be both Japanese and American, belonging fully to two worlds. Perhaps this is what peace truly means. Not treaties between governments, but new life that transcends old hatreds. This image of a child born between former enemy nations resonated deeply with Miyuki. She shared Yumiko's letter with Dr. Yamamoto during one of their planning sessions. New generations will not carry our memories, he observed. They will create their own. Is that not preferable, Miyuki asked, that they know peace where we knew war? Yamamoto sighed heavily. If they forget entirely, history may repeat itself. If they remember only hatred, healing cannot progress. The challenge is finding balanced remembrance that honors the past without poisoning the future. This wisdom guided Miyuki as she helped develop educational material for those who understand both Japanese and American approaches to medicine. The implications slowly crystallized. You want me to return to Japan? As an advisor, yes. You would work with occupation authorities to identify and certify Japanese medical personnel, establish training protocols, and help rebuild medical education systems. Your unique position between cultures makes you exceptionally qualified. Miyuki stared at the photographs, recognizing streets where she had once walked, now unrecognizable beneath mountains of debris. Familiar hospital buildings stood as hollow shells. In one image, a child with radiation burns gazed directly at the camera, eyes enormous in a devastated face. How long would this assignment last? Initially 1 year with possible extension. You would have diplomatic status, reasonable comfort, and the opportunity to help your homeland when it desperately needs someone with your particular talents. Williams left the offer open, promising to return in 3 days for her answer. Miyuki completed her afternoon appointments mechanically, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. That evening at the Reynolds farm, she shared the proposal over dinner. The family listened intently, their faces reflecting the same shock and uncertainty she felt. Japan, Sarah whispered, setting down her fork. After everything you've built here. They wouldn't send you to rebuild their medical system if they didn't recognize your value, Frank observed pragmatically. It's quite an honor. Jimmy remained silent throughout the discussion, his expression unreadable. Only later, as they walked together through twilight-painted wheat fields, did he share his thoughts. You have to go, he said simply. Miyuki looked at him in surprise. You think so? I've watched you heal this town one patient at a time. Now your country needs that same healing. He paused, choosing words carefully. When we first met on that transport ship, you were caught between worlds. Going back to Japan now would close that circle somehow. His understanding struck her deeply. Jimmy recognized what she herself had only begun to grasp, that her journey from prisoner to healer could only be complete by returning to help rebuild what war had destroyed. What about my patients here, the clinic? Your family. Oakley survived before you came, and it will manage after you leave. As for our family, Jimmy smiled gently. Some connections transcend distance. That night, Miyuki wrote in her diary, America gave me a second chance when I expected only imprisonment. The Reynolds family offered home when I had none. Oakley taught me that enemies can become neighbors. Now I must take these lessons back to Japan. Perhaps this is why I survived when so many did not. To serve as a bridge between two worlds that must find ways to coexist after such terrible conflict. The news spread quickly through town. Reactions varied predictably. Some expressed relief at the foreign doctor's departure. Others voiced genuine dismay at losing their physician. Helen Parker, ever practical, began advertising for a replacement while insisting the new doctor would need to maintain Dr. Tanaka's standards of care. Most touching were the children's responses. Emily Henderson brought a carefully drawn picture of Miyuki in her white coat surrounded by smiling stick figures. This is you making everyone better, she explained. Timothy Baker delivered a jar of particularly interesting insects he had collected. Certain Japanese children would appreciate such treasures. The high school students presented a leather medical bag embossed with her initials. Take a piece of Kansas with you, they said. Sunday service before her departure became an unexpected celebration of reconciliation. Reverend Clark's sermon addressed transitions and healing between nations. Without directly mentioning Miyuki, he spoke eloquently about seeds that must travel far from the parent plant to fulfill their purpose. After the service, a reception line formed spontaneously. Even those who had initially opposed her appointment came forward with awkward well wishes. Bill Henderson approached last, his recovery from the heart attack evident in his improved color. My David was stationed in the Philippines, he said abruptly. If he had been wounded, I'd have wanted someone like you treating him. The Japanese children, you'll be helping. They're not responsible for the war any more than you were. They deserve care just as much as our children here. Coming from Bill, this represented extraordinary evolution. Miyuki bowed deeply in response, that traditional gesture expressing what English words could not. Her final evening at the Reynolds farm held a bittersweet quality. Sarah prepared all of Miyuki's favorite American foods: fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, fresh corn, and apple pie. Frank brought out a bottle of wine saved from before the war. They ate on the porch as the sun set spectacularly over the wheat fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We have something for you," Sarah said, when the dishes were cleared. Frank presented a small wooden box. Inside lay a silver locket containing a photograph of the Reynolds family on one side, and on the other a tiny pressed wheat stalk from their time. "So you'll remember your American family," Sarah explained, tears brightening her eyes. "And the land that became your second home," Frank added. Jimmy's gift came later as they sat alone on the porch swing after his parents had retired. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with intertwined cherry and apple blossoms. The symbolism was unmistakable. Japan and America forever connected. "For your new observations," he explained, "the old diary was about contradictions. This one can be about connections." Miyuki traced the intertwined blossoms with her fingertip. "Will you write to me every week?" he promised. "And when your assignment ends, whatever you decide, then you'll always have a home here." The question of their relationship remained delicately unspoken. They had moved beyond friendship, but stopped short of explicit romance, both recognizing that the timing demanded separation rather than commitment. Some possibilities need educational materials for medical students. The curriculum acknowledged wartime medical abuses as ethical failures while emphasizing professional responsibility that transcended national interests. Christmas 1946 arrived with unusual solemnity in occupied Tokyo. Miyuki received a care package from the Reynolds family containing homemade cookies, warm socks, Kansas newspapers, and a small, decorated evergreen branch. She placed it on her desk alongside the journal Jimmy had given her, its pages now filling with observations about rebuilding rather than contradictions. New Year brought increasing responsibility as occupation authorities recognized Miyuki's effectiveness. She received appointment to a committee overseeing medical licensing throughout occupied territories. This position allowed her to advocate for qualified Japanese physicians whose careers had been interrupted by military service, but who had not participated in ethical violations. Spring 1947 arrived with cherry blossoms decorating parks that had somehow survived the bombing. Walking beneath their delicate beauty, Miyuki reflected on how these trees had witnessed Japan's militaristic expansion, its devastating defeat, and now its gradual renewal. Nature's cycles continued regardless of human conflict. A telegram arrived from San Francisco. "Baby girl born, named Miyuki Sarah Torres, mother and daughter healthy, would be honored if you would serve as godmother." This unexpected connection between past and future brought tears. Somewhere in California, a child carried Miyuki's name alongside Sarah Reynolds, Japanese and American heritage united in new life. Summer brought evaluation of Miyuki's one-year assignment. Occupation authorities, impressed by her accomplishments, offered a 2-year extension with expanded responsibilities. The decision required careful consideration. On a warm evening, Miyuki walked to a small neighborhood shrine that had survived the firebombing. Elderly women tended carefully to memorial plaques honoring ancestors and war dead alike. Children played nearby, too young to remember the conflict that had shaped their world. Sitting quietly on a stone bench, Miyuki reread Jimmy's most recent letter. The Reynolds farm had produced record wheat yields. The new town doctor was competent, but lacked Miyuki's connection with patients. Jimmy had begun building his own house on a corner of the family property. "The foundation is complete," he wrote. "The frame will rise this autumn. I've designed it with large windows facing east, where the sun rises. There are 2 bedrooms, though I only need 1 for now. The future remains open to possibilities." The unspoken invitation lingered between his carefully chosen words. Kansas remained a potential future waiting for her decision when Japan no longer needed her unique skills. As twilight deepened, Miyuki reached clarity about her immediate path. Japan's medical system required additional years of rebuilding before achieving self-sufficiency. The lessons she had learned in America could serve her homeland during this crucial transition. The bridges she had begun constructing between cultures needed further strengthening. She would accept the extension, continuing her work while maintaining connections to Oakley. Kansas would remain her second home, waiting for her return when circumstances permitted. Jimmy would continue writing their relationship, developing through correspondence until reunion became possible. The following morning, Miyuki officially accepted the extended assignment. That afternoon, she visited a photography studio and commissioned two identical portraits. One would remain in Tokyo, the other would travel to Kansas with her next letter, accompanied by cherry blossom seeds saved from the spring blooming. "Plant these near your new house," she wrote to Jimmy. "They may struggle in Kansas weather, but with proper care they might survive. Like certain transplanted people, they can adapt to new environments while maintaining their essential nature." She concluded her letter with words that bridged past and future. "The enemy once looked into my eyes and saw a human being. I looked back and discovered the same. Now we must teach others this simple truth, that humanity transcends borders, that healing begins with recognition of shared pain, that peace requires courage from former adversaries. I will continue this work in Japan for now, but keep a place for me in Kansas. Some journeys circle back to their beginning, transformed by the distance traveled." As autumn painted Tokyo's surviving trees in crimson and gold, Miyuki Tanaka continued moving between worlds carrying bacon and cherry blossoms in her heart-building bridges, one human connection at a time. The war had ended, but the greater work of peace had only begun. In a small farming town in Kansas, a new house rose facing eastward toward the rising sun, its foundation solid, its future open to possibilities.